Stoughton Area School District Board of Education to order. Becky, could you please take the roll?
Yes. Mr. Buban?
Here.
Mr. Coughlin will be coming later. Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon? Here. Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Robb is absent. Ms. Sorg?
Here.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Here.
President Dirks?
Here. First up on the agenda is public comment. I'm told at least one person did sign up to speak and address the board. If you would like to address the board, please come forward to the podium, state and spell your name, and give us your address, please. And try to keep your comments to 3 minutes if possible.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Schneeberger, Schneeberger. I live at 6558 North Oak Ridge Road in Evansville, and I have been a teacher. Well, I student taught at Stoughton High School in 1997, and I have since been a teacher there since 2002. There are two items from the last board meeting that were said during the discussion regarding the compensation plan that I wanted to address. The first item regards the statement that the average salary of the staff has increased under the current compensation plan. And I felt that that statement needed a little clarification. Yes, the average salary has increased, but the reason the average salary has increased is because the lower end of, for lack of a better term, our salary schedule got moved up, but the upper end has basically stayed the same with very small or slight increases. So bringing that bottom up has in fact increased the average, but the top has remained pretty much the same. The second item had to do with the number of people that have been hired in the last 2 years. It was implied that they accepted jobs with SASD under this current compensation plan, and they will not be happy to have the system they were hired under changed. Again, I felt that idea needed clarification. I have talked with many new hires in the last 2 years, and they have all told me that they were not aware of the compensation plan at the time they went through their interviews and were hired, nor did they understand how it worked. They accepted their jobs here at SASD because it was a job and they needed a job, and they'd heard great things about the work we are doing here. In fact, when I've been asked by new staff to explain the compensation plan to them, I have had to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't explain how the plan works because I don't understand how the plan works myself. And that is why I have chosen to opt out of the compensation plan for the last 2 years. Our current compensation plan is not working. We need a plan that is objective and not subjective. We need a plan that is predictable so staff know where they can go salary-wise during their time with SASD and how they can get there. Therefore, I ask that you vote to allow the compensation committee to have more flexibility in what they are able to put into a new plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to address the board tonight? All right, I don't see anybody else coming forward, so we'll move on then to the legislative update. Donna?
Well, I've put in a few things in Neptune that just talk about the budget, and WSB has put forth a few, well, several actually, memos that discuss the impact of each of the elements of the budget for your review. Today was going to be the vote. YJFC, they were going to be discussing Foxconn and then some other things, so I haven't heard anything. I've been keeping my eye on the Twitter feed for WSB, and they haven't really said anything about the special needs voucher, which is something that they were going to be making a change to today. So I'll just keep you posted as I learn.
Okay. Any questions about any of that? Okay. District Administrator report.
Thanks, Scott. A couple things. Since we last met last week, staff went through Alice training. Scott was able to walk around with me in our brightly colored vests to designate that we were observers with our face masks. To observe, we were able to observe parts of training in every building. I thought it was really well done. Initial feedback that I've gotten from staff who have come up to me said it was a little scary, it was a little uncomfortable to have to be talking about those things, but they appreciated that. We are sending out a survey to get input from staff on that. But that happened since our last meeting. Today was the first day of school. It was great to see all the students coming back. I live in the Fox Prairie neighborhood, so I walked to school today with a group of the neighborhood students and greeted parents there. It's great to see the excitement. All 5 of the buildings reported that it was a real good first day of school. Some minor glitches here or there, but nothing major, nothing that is beyond the norm of the first day of school when we have approximately 3,000 students coming back to the district. Over the next couple days, students in grades 6-12 will be receiving their Chromebooks, so that'll be another exciting segue or another exciting point to starting the school year, which is, as you all know, something new for us. Tomorrow is open house at the high school from 5:30 to 7. If you remember, the 3 elementary schools and the middle school had their open house last week Wednesday. This Wednesday is the high school open house from 5:30 to 7. This Friday is another home football game. Our football team is 3-0, which is great news. And a thank you to those that were able to help out at Friday's game. This Friday, before the game, we are having a staff appreciation tailgate party. So I want to make sure all of you are invited. So bring, come with your appetites, bring your families. We start serving at 5:30. Administration, we are serving. So we're serving from 5:30 right up to the start of the game. And then any staff that are at the game at halftime, we will invite them and their families to walk out on the track so that the community can recognize all their great work and accomplishments and thank them as we kick off the school year. Last week we also, as I mentioned here, some of the different opportunities that we're able to offer our staff, including a membership to Level Up, the fitness club. And I'm happy to say that last week, Wednesday and Thursday, approximately 60% of our staff took advantage of the membership and signed up for a membership. Staff can still sign up, even if they weren't able to go to sign up on Wednesday and Thursday. They can just go to Level Up and present their staff ID and we'll be able to get a free membership. Tailgate party, back to the tailgate party, I forgot to mention, we have roughly right now 260 staff members who have RSVP'd for the tailgate party. We are making to-go meals for our nighttime custodial staff that have to work on Friday night, and we will deliver them dinner as a thank you for that. That's all I had.
Okay. Questions about any of that?
I have one question.
Sure.
We did hear from a community member about the Chromebook and not having internet access. I just wanted to know if that had been followed up with and if you've had other ones like that.
Paul followed up with that community member and addressed the concerns. One of their concerns was if they didn't have good internet or no internet and using their own data. The high school and the middle school both have hotspots that our students can check out. So they can use our data instead of their own. And so their hotspots that they go to the library and are able to check them out. If there is a student that needs it more long-term, we'll make arrangements and work with that student and their family.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Yoli?
Do we have any update about the accident?
Publicly, we're still, our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of all those that were involved. We know publicly that we have one young lady still in the hospital. The update, I don't know anything else than that. And when it's appropriate, the family will share what they have with us. But our thoughts and prayers go out to that young lady and her family, and all of our students who were involved in it, and all of our students on the cross-country team, and our students who have gone through this. So we keep thinking of them.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Tim. Next up is the consent agenda. Yoli?
I move approval. Move approval of the August 28th, 2017 regular meeting minutes. I move approval of the August 25th, September 1st, 2017 check register as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donations to the district. 3/4 size violin from Tara Hopkins for a student rental instrument. And new teacher welcome bag from the Stoughton Chamber of Commerce filled with the following donated gift items from Home Savings Bank, pens, $500 off closing costs, eyeglasses white. Thane Anderson DDS toothbrush kit, Sons of Norway flyers, Greater Madison Orthodontics water bottle with candy and toothbrush, Edward Jones, Lisa Fernand pen, candy flyer, Stoughton Lioness brochure, Stoughton Area School District Back to School newspaper insert, Crest Funeral travel tissues and post-its, Stoughton Chamber Community Directory, Pure Integrity Homes hand sanitizer and business cards, beer beaker, pen and pencil, Associated Bank $300 bonus offer, golf tees and letter, the UPS store $5 gift certificate and paper, Century 21st Sick Horseman mousepad, calendar magnet, Stoughton Opera House one-page schedule, Yahara River Grocery Co-op $5 off, Abbey Wishaw State Farm canned koozie packer schedule magnet, Postal Bakery free donut, Paul Lawrence Coldwell Banker packer schedule magnet, Pop Some Leach $5 off, Naughty Norsky canned koozie $4 chip, Anytime Fitness $50 off, Coachman's Cove Resort free 18 holes greens fee, Gunderson's Funeral mints hand sanitizer, Moyer's Landscaping $5 off in stock nursery item, Century 21st Patrice Bennett canned koozie, R&S Insurance desk calendar, Stoughton Trailers truck stress squishy, Complete Office can opener Kiran koozie pen, Stoughton Hospital market bag pen 15% off gift shop, Yahara Dental travel tooth care kit, Wells Fargo plush ponies, Lift Risey mug, pen, pencil, postcard, flyer, McLean Pharmacy $10 gift card, Town Planner calendars, post-its, Stoughton Public Library water bottle and flyer, H1 canned koozie eyeglass cleaner, pens, flyer, Fire Up Nutrition coupon for free shake, Cummins windshield scraper and flyer, George Lavique and Associates path of paper and flyer, B&G Foods taco shells and flyer, Start brochure, a new thermal bag, Malone Tree Service canned koozies, Scaling pens and Band-Aid dispenser, the Flower Factory brochures, Madison Essentials Magazine 2 magazines, Village Players flyers, American Legion pens and free lunch coupon, McFarland State Bank lemonade mix, WRSA brochures and bookmark, VSW free lunch, prize impression flyers, teaser brochure and 10% off, Old National Bank flyer, bumper sticker, football and canned koozie, St. Venus magnet and 25% off mints, Common Living Connections flyer and magnet clip, American Transmission Company bag and no related cash donation budget adjustments. I move approval of permanent professional educator contract for Amanda Bradley, Gina Holland, and Cameron Rosen, and a temporary professional educator contract for Alexa Harrison for the 2017-18 school year.
Approval of the consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
A second.
From Steve. Any discussion or questions? Donna?
How much did those bags weigh?
But that's what I was
Must have been
wondering, how big
huge.
were they?
They
They received 40.
There's a lot of things in there.
Oh, my God.
Great, well,
I think Jolie needs a small round of applause for
Reading all this stuff. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. All in favor of approval of the consent agenda, then please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Under discussion items, first up is our school resource officers' introduction and report.
It's open. Is it?
right behind Joe. It's on the,
Oh, thank you. This one?
Joe, maybe
Right,
put
that one.
somewhere
Okay, thank
else.
you.
Yeah, I know. We need maybe a little shorter stool for me or something.
Thanks. I'm Officer Todd DeVici. I presented last week. So I'm just going to talk about day in and day out duties of my job, things that I've done, and a few statistics from last year. So this is what I believe a school resource officer's position is, what my job is to do. I'm not going to read it verbatim for you, but I'll leave it up there for a little bit so you guys can read it. Basically what it's saying is that my job is not only to enforce laws and to keep a building safe, but it's to create relationships with students, create relationships with staff so that somehow they feel a little more at peace in the building, that cops aren't such bad people. And my desire is to be there and be engaged with students. Before I was a police officer here in Stoughton, I taught for 7 years in Chicago at a therapeutic day school. I taught students with a wide variety of disabilities, from pretty profound emotional disabilities and to a self-contained classroom of children with autism. So my exposure to kids with disabilities is pretty lengthy. So I've had many years experience, and it's kind of my passion. So being in this profession and being in a school is kind of where I feel at home. It's pretty nice. I love my job. So again, my job is not only as a police officer, but it's as a mentor, a counselor, a teacher, coworker. I don't know how it happened, but I gained a following of about 7 students. They come to my office every single day, multiple times a day. I'm sure most of the time it's just to get out of class, but I don't mind the interruption, breaking up the monotony a little bit. So a few examples of how I was a mentor this past year. At Fox Prairie, I met with a first grade student. The staff there, his direct contacts at the school, reached out to me, asked if I would meet with him. He's a student he comes from a single parent home. His mom works 10, 12 hours a day. His father's in prison, and he doesn't have any male influences in his life. His grandfather is not present either, so he had nobody, so they asked if I would engage him and create a relationship with him. So I met with him weekly for the entirety of the school year. And there was a second grade student at Sandhill that I met with every other week. Exact same situation. They live in a low-income housing complex here in Stoughton. He has 4 siblings living in a 2-bedroom apartment with him, and again, a single-parent home. So it's students like that I enjoy reaching out to. I speak lectures, if you will, in a few of the classes. In the government class, I don't really give a lecture. It's more just a question and answer. I think there's a big disconnect between the community and law enforcement and how we're viewed and how we're spoken about. And my desire is, and I've been talking to Mike Cruz about this, is that somehow get me in the classroom a little bit more often, just as a cute question and answer. And it's ironic, I was watching the news a few days ago, or yesterday, and there's a government class at a university, I don't know where it is, that was taught by law enforcement to students to give them exposure to law enforcement. They would go on ride-alongs, and I wouldn't go as far as ride-alongs or taking them on the road with me, but I think giving them a little more exposure to police and having them any questions that they want to answer and me being available for that, I think would be extremely beneficial moving forward, kind of engaging these kids at a younger age. And then in the health classes, both at the high school and the middle school, I give talks about internet safety, social media safety, as well as drug abuse, and not just how to spot certain drugs and effects that they have on the body, but also the criminal penalties associated with them. Counselor, as I said before, I have numerous students that would come in the mornings or throughout the day and kind of check in with me. I don't really spend much time with them, but it's more they come to you when they want to talk to me. It could be about something that's happening in the building, something that's happening at home, or just to talk about anything they want, issues they have with friends. So getting to cases and incidents, in this past school year, 2016-2017, I spoke a little bit about the differences between cases and incidences last board meeting, kind of refresh your memory. So if I were to take a case on anything that's given to me, anything passed along to my desk, if I'm referred by a principal, if it's something that I witness that I believe is the beginning of something that could grow into something much larger, or if it's something that would need to be documented strictly for criminal purposes or citation purposes, then it's something that I would take a case on, do a full narrative and a full-blown investigation into. As far as incidences go, it could be something as simple as this girl called this person a name in the hallway. It could qualify for a crime, but I don't charge them. Something very minor like that. That would end up being brought to my desk. So total, I had 301 calls for service that were documented last school year. 149 of those were incidences, and 152 of those were cases. We'll get into the time spent on each of these cases in a few slides here, but that's not all I do during the day. I don't just deal with criminal matters or citations, or I don't just take cases and incidences. There are often times where I work with principals and I work with the teachers that might have questions for me regarding a wide variety of things. Today, a pill bottle was found in the school, a prescription pill bottle with pills. So they asked me to come into an office and identify them, see if those are actually the pills that are in the prescription, and talk to the student and verify that he didn't obtain these illegally, and that was it. So something like that I wouldn't necessarily take a case on, or I wouldn't take an incident on. It was a matter of 2 minutes that I spent just helping Mike out and the new assistant principal. But moving forward, so I didn't put all the calls in here, but just a few of the more popular ones, if you will. So I had 13 disorderly conduct cases, and 5 of those resulted in arrests or citations. I took 7 battery cases last year, 3 arrests or citations. And when I say it's arrests or citations, technically a citation is an arrest. Some of these were actual arrests where I took them and escorted them out of the building, and the majority of them were just citations, however. I took 3 child abuse cases, 2 of them resulted in arrest. I took 4 damage to property cases, and 4 resulted in citations. 12 check person cases, 4 were voluntary commitments, and 4 were emergency detentions. If you're not familiar with those, the vast majority of cases that I label as a check person is a student who's suicidal. You can see that only 8 of those resulted in some sort of action. The remaining were things that were whatever claim the student made that they were going to take their own life wasn't able to be validated. It was said in the heat of a moment. It wasn't a threat. So based on my assessment and the assessment of Journey Mental Health in Madison. So for voluntary commitments, a voluntary commitment is when the student decides that they're going to voluntarily go to a hospital for evaluation. And for emergency detentions are when I believe the threat to be believable. I do believe that if a student were to go home or leave the building, that they would attempt to take their own lives, and they don't want to go seek treatment on their own. I would place them under an emergency detention, which means that they're detained but they're not under arrest, and would get them whatever services the county will provide. I had one hate crime last year. Hate crime is not technically a crime, it's an enhancer, but it was pretty big, I think, in considering the amount of minority staff that we have here in the district. I had 6 drug cases. One of these cases led to pretty significant information for our department that's leading to a pretty, it's a part of a pretty big investigation that could end up stopping the vast majority of the traffic in here in Stoughton. And that came from one of our cases last year that we worked. 2 of those cases, parents were supplying the drugs to their juveniles. I had 38 juvenile complaint cases last year. Juvenile complaint cases is kind of a blanket statement. It could be anything from a disruption in class that doesn't quite meet the elements of disorderly conduct in my professional opinion, and it could be something as simple as truancy. So, I had 4 sex offenses, including a repeated sexual assault of a child. I had 15 theft cases. 4 of those resulted in citations or arrest, and 2 weapons offense cases. Both of those resulted in arrests. So, touching on a few of the significant cases, the repeated sexual assault of a child was a rough one. It took weeks of resources to an investigation, working with one of our detectives to find the person, gather the necessary amount of information and evidence that we could. We ended up getting a full confession, which was pretty amazing. And it all started from middle school staff. They identified that this student was making statements, and through our investigation, we found that them to be valid, and that man is sitting in jail right now. So significant cases continued. We had a hate crime. Racist email was sent to one of our staff. I charged as many possible crimes as I could. I personally don't have any tolerance for it. So we got creative and charged as many crimes as we could. 4th-degree sexual assault of a child happened during a class period in a hallway, a pretty secluded hallway, during winter break. I don't get much information regarding the disposition of cases involving juveniles. It's not information that I'm privy to being a juvenile, but I do know that the case was settled and never went to trial. Property damage. We had a student that for a week or 2 relentlessly drew swastikas and other racist propaganda, like etching it into school walls and tables and bathroom stalls. We found out who it was, and we sent out charges up to the DA's office on him. Weapons offenses, we had a student in middle school bring an airsoft gun to school. I believe it was the 2nd week of school last year. And the student brought a box cutter to the school in the middle of school and was chasing students around. He was prosecuted, and that one didn't go to trial, but it was charged. Sorry, I'm just backwards. And then 3 child abuse cases, and one of those resulted in an arrest. So my time dedicated to calls, kind of what I said before, if it's an incident, even incidences, I could spend anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 days working on an incident, and it could be solely because I can't find the people or contact the people that I need to interview for a very minor matter. Just to do a thorough investigation, I need to make sure that I interview as many people as I can, as many people as I have to, and for something as simple as a 2-sentence report. So that's what an incident would be. And most cases, it could be anywhere from 3 hours. Most cases, I would end up having to go out into the community. Oftentimes, a lot of my time is kids sitting in an office waiting for a parent that wants to be in on the interview with me as I speak to their child, and it's waiting for them to come from work. It could be in Madison or wherever they might be working down in Janesville. So it could take some time for them to get there. So it could be anywhere from half hour, 3 hours, up to weeks of time dedicated to investigations of the repeated sexual assault of the child. Like I said, it was 2 weeks worth of interviews. Myself working with the detective, executing search warrants, applying search warrants. It was a pretty involved investigation for that one. So that's what most of my time is spent on those cases. Again, travel. It takes up a lot of time, especially if we're going up to Madison, or sometimes we have to go up to the Dells, Baraboo we've been to. Take some time. I've been asked by Mike to enforce parking at the high school. I spend approximately 1 to 3 days, depending on the weather, and just how much time I have. There are some days, like today I took one incident, but I had 5 other things that I had to get called on that took anywhere from a half hour to an hour, and then just going in and checking with other schools. But if I can, I'll try and get out there and enforce parking 1 to 3 days a week. It could be anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours if I try and hit both lots. I supervise the lunchroom. Mike has asked me to be in the lunchroom to help with supervision. They just don't have the coverage, so during lunch hours, if I'm able to spend the entirety of both lunches in the high school and in the cafeteria, I'll spend my lunch in the cafeteria. This year they've asked that I stand by the food line because they've had some thefts of food. People will take fries and put them on a plate and take double orders of fries or something. So, SROs, in Dane County, we have monthly school resource officers meetings up in Madison. Invaluable information is shared between SROs regarding drug trends. We had a lot of juvenile parties in Stoughton this year, and not even half of the kids that we found in the parties that we broke up were from Stoughton. So communication with the SROs regarding parties and which kids are hanging out with which kids helps us to identify kids that are at risk for drug abuse or that might be drinking a lot. It really helps us with that. Improvement in school supervision, even speaking with the other SROs throughout the school year about their camera systems and different apps. The app that I spoke about last week was given to me by another SRO. I work the football games. Every home football game I'm there, with the exception of this past week. I wasn't there. I was working the Badger game, but every home game that I'm able to make, I work. That's it. Any questions? Sure.
Don?
These reports that you work on about incidents or whatever they become.
Yep.
Where are those reports saved? Do they become part of the student's record, or are they stored someplace? And is there some expectation of confidentiality?
There is. So the school has their reports. They do something completely separate from mine. So when I'm called into a case, everything I do is strictly from a law enforcement standpoint. So we have our own storage system it's the same system that Madison uses, that Dane County Sheriff's Office uses. It's not accessible by anybody. You have to go through an open records request like any other police department on the planet if you want access to that. And even if you wanted to, all the names of any juvenile that's involved would end up being redacted. You wouldn't have access to the names.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Other questions, Steve?
Our current policy 1019 does, and it kind of gets to maybe Donna's point, is it does reference enforcing district policies.
Mm-hmm.
And so while you may have a law that's been broken,
Mm-hmm.
there may be a policy that's been
Sure.
broken. Do you distinguish your data based on law versus policy, or are you kind of focusing on law and not policy? And if so then that feeds to, is there policy information that you're sharing with the school district?
So when you say policy, I'm assuming things like dress code, or if it's
well, I'm assuming it's policy related to safety, student conduct, and discipline issues. So it could be crossing the law.
Yeah, and
policy
it is
and law are together.
It is a very thin line, because just take the crime of disorderly conduct. If one person is disturbed by one person's behavior, it will qualify as disorderly conduct. So a student has an outburst in class. While it might be a little harsh to charge disorderly conduct or to go the criminal route, it's more of a classroom management issue, but oftentimes they'll be called into that. Students in the hallways have been asked to enforce hats and different dress code violations. Kids are out of class without a hall pass. I've been asked to escort them back to class or give them to one of the hall monitors. And, so I do those, but I don't take a report on any of those.
Okay.
I don't do any sort of documentation for any of that.
Okay.
And Todd's not called into every incident. And so there are incidences that the assistant principals or my crews deal with at the high school where it doesn't rise to the level that we bring in the SRO. And then even when they do bring in the SRO, it's two separate investigations. So the high school administration will take their notes, and that's what is in our system. And Todd's notes are separate because there could be disciplinary action on our side, but not on his side, and vice versa.
Right.
And there could be information shared. Oftentimes, if it's a case that I see evolving into something much bigger, I'll ask the assistant principals to step out if it's a criminal matter, just because information might be shared that they don't necessarily have privilege to. So it's the high school staff at least does a very good job of separating the two, my job and their job when it comes to matters of discipline. As Tim said, they do a great job of enforcing school rules and keeping me separate from that, and not necessarily using me as an intimidation. There are some times where I do feel like they might, on occasion. It might be justified, it might not be.
Like cell phone use? I'm just kidding.
So definitely cell phone use,
Just
yes.
kidding, just kidding.
There's an astounding amount of cell phone violations. Laws broken using cell phones that I've worked last year, but yeah, they do a great job of making sure that they bring me on cases that I should and keep me out of ones that I don't need to be part of.
All right, thanks.
Other questions? Joe?
Yeah, how long do you see yourself staying with this role? How long did our first SRO last?
3 years.
3 years?
You're there.
Is that typical? People do this long-term, or?
You know, it really varies. My best resource in the areas was Brian Johnson, the former DeForest SRO. Wealth of knowledge, just for online crimes and crimes involving social media. Just a wealth of knowledge. He would have done it for his entire career if he could have, but unfortunately they have a limit on how many years they can work in DeForest. For me, unless I go promotion-wise, if I decide to put in for any promotions and get the promotion, I don't see myself leaving this position. I love being in a school. I love working with the kids.
So we don't have any limits like that?
We don't, no. Most departments in Dane County don't. I know Madison does, DeForest does, Verona does, and I believe that's it. McFarland's has been there for quite a few years. Oregon, unfortunately, they've had some things go on in the department, so they've had a lot of turnover recently. But yeah, in my opinion, I think it's only beneficial to be in the position as long as possible. And I think even if I were to leave for a promotion, that'd be the only reason I would leave this position, if it's a promotion or I'm asked to leave. So yeah, I'll be here for a while. It's invaluable creating those relationships. I think that's one of the biggest problems, again, coming from Chicago. One of the hardest things is that teachers leave after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and I think a lot of the school discipline issues in the classroom, the classroom behaviors could decrease if they form relationships, and unfortunately some students aren't given that opportunity because there's such a large turnover. So I think the longer I stay, the better it is for the school district. And, I like the job, so I mind it.
And Joe, in some of those districts like DeForest, I can speak to DeForest, that policy, and that's a police policy, not a school district policy, and that was put into place because of political reasons. Because there was an SRO that was there for 18 years, and there was some hard feelings within the department. So their limitations are the actual department saying that assignment can only be X number of years.
Right, and it's not, I don't know if they're necessarily the exception, but I know in a lot of smaller departments, there's not a lot of opportunity for movement. There aren't a lot of positions open. It's patrol and then command staff, and that's pretty much it. And then you have investigations, so very limited movement. And I know that the departments that do put an end date, it's one of the main reasons is because of that, so we can get some people doing some different things, and officers getting involved in different areas of law enforcement.
Well, I liked everything you said. That's why I asked the question, because I think that longevity and relationships are
It is.
real important.
It's the
in
most,
what you're
it's the
doing
most
here, so
important part of my job, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would second that. I know in Janesville, for example, there are people who've been SROs for 15 years plus. And from a prosecutor's standpoint, that's really, really helpful because, you know, those folks know the kids, they know their families. If I've got a question about, you know, this thing got referred to me, is this really something that I need to be involved with or not, I can pick up the phone and call them and get a good answer. So, yeah, I agree. Those relationships are, to me, that's the most important function of an SRO.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alice.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm curious what relation, kind of going with that from a parent standpoint. If parents have concerns, are you reachable? Do parents go through the school first, through administration, to be able to speak with you, or is that not something you?
Is this outside of the casework, like specific cases? So
Right.
it's just like if they have a question for me.
Question, concern, something about their kid or a community issue that they want to know how they can do something about it or express their concerns. Can they reach out to you, or should they go right to administration? Or
I know in law enforcement, it's a very specific hierarchy of how to communicate with people. As far as communicating within the district and the parents, I don't know. That's a good question. I've never had that question. The only time I've had communication with parents during the school year is when their kids are either witnesses, victims, or suspects in a case.
Okay.
But in all those cases, especially the victims, I have no problem. They provide me with a work cell phone, and it's on 24 hours a day. I wish it wasn't sometimes, but it is on 24 hours a day, and they can contact me. I give them my card, I write down my cell phone number. And,
Todd also has an
they can contact
extension in the district.
Yep.
He also has an email address, a school email address that he's accessible.
Yep. So on all my
Our
emails,
system.
it has cell phone number, office number, number to the police department, email addresses, both email addresses. So if they can't reach me at one of those, then I'm probably dead. So.
Other questions? Yoli?
So, you're the only school officer, right?
I am,
Because how
yep.
do you manage your time? How do you rotate or?
I don't know. That's a really good question because I'm on the move quite a bit. I know that when I tell the other school resource officers how many students I have, it blows their minds. It's usually about one SRO for about half the size of students. So the amount of students we have in Stoughton, in other communities, they usually have 2. So I do my best to get around to all the schools if I can. Today I was able to get to 2 other schools other than the high school. It's my main station of operations in the high school. That's where the vast majority of my calls come from. River Bluffs is a very close second. And for some reason last year we had an inordinate amount of calls at the elementary schools compared to when Cole was there. But yeah, so I do the best to move around. I think it's like most days in law enforcement. Some days, some weeks I could be on the road and I'll get 2 calls a day, 3 calls a day. I might not take a report for a week. And then there are weeks where I'll take 12 calls a day and I'll have 5 reports in a day. And that'll be every single day for a week. It's just, you really don't know. So on my slow weeks, I try and get out and I get to the other schools just to check in. And on the busier days, it's just, I do the best I can. And if I'm approved for overtime, then I'll stay after, get my reports done. If it's a big enough case, I'll stay as long as I have to until the case is at least at a satisfactory level to leave for the next day.
Other questions?
Joe?
Yeah, that brings up another question for me. Do you feel like you can cover it, or is there a discussion that we need to have at some point about looking into having two? I mean, I know it's a
Sure.
huge budgetary consideration, but I want to know if you can cover it or not.
So last year, like I said, it's really, every week is completely different. There were weeks last year when, by the time I left during that day, I still had 5 reports to do. And I'd come back and right first thing in the morning, I'm getting called to River Bluff. And then at River Bluff, I'm getting called to Fox Parade at the same time, and the high school calls, and I'm 3 calls deep. So, and then there were some weeks where I wasn't called to any school. They were great weeks. So it's really hit or miss. For my first year at least, I think I did a pretty good job of making sure that I handled all the calls and got everything down on paper that I could. So, yeah, I think for now, I think I can cover the district. If we grow, as I think we've been told Stoughton's going to be growing, it might not be a bad idea to look into another SRO. I don't know if I could do 4,000 students, but yeah.
Well, I hope we're faced with that. That'd
Yeah.
be wonderful for
It'd be
everyone.
nice. That'd be really nice.
I had a question
Yeah.
related to that. Well, maybe I shouldn't assume. Are there calls that you are unable to take and then we have to pull somebody in off patrol to answer to them? And if so, do you have any idea how many those are?
We did that a number of times last year. And it's usually when I'm in the deep cases, the big cases. So when I'm involved in investigations and I'm running around town and trying to make contact with suspects, victims, getting in contact with parents. It's those times when, I mean, it's like any other law enforcement job, calls just back up. There are pending calls, I mean, as far as you can see on our screen. So it's those are the times when I'm backed up, and we have to have guys from the road come in and take it. If it's something as simple as a rules violation, or if it's something that doesn't pose an imminent threat to other students, then I'll tell them to hold it, because we're bare minimums on the road the way it is, so we can't really afford. And I think it was before I started here, but I think that's why we had the SRO position, because we kept taking guys off the road and there just wasn't enough coverage on the road.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the reasons. I think it was.
Yeah, so nothing's changed on the roads. We're still working bare minimums on the road, and taking a guy off the road to handle a call in the school when I'm there doesn't make much sense, unless it's a fight call, or if it's an ongoing sexting issue where they just continue to do it and it's just spreading like wildfire. And that's unfortunately how it works with nude pictures. I mean, tens of thousands of people have it within a matter of seconds. So.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'd be interested in maybe some follow-up information on that, kind of getting at what Joe is saying, is, the concern that you may be spread too thin. I don't know that that's necessarily something we can address in the short term, but I think it'd be something good for us to know about.
Sure. Yep.
Thanks.
Do that.
Any other questions or comments from anybody? Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Judy, college, career, and life readiness.
Yeah, as Judy's walking up here, just want to remind the board that, on August 14th, I believe it was, meetings are all running together in the last couple weeks. August 14th, during my administrative report, I mentioned that we are looking for different metrics, and we're looking at different ways to assess whether students are being successful and the district's being successful. And I mentioned standardized tests as being one. And we started that conversation August 21st when we had the board retreat about looking at the school report cards and looking at some of the metrics on the testing. Phase 2 of that, I mentioned college and career and life readiness, and looking at what are those skills, and starting the conversations of the metrics we should be using to measure whether our students possess those skills. And then the third leg, or the third part of that, is student engagement. So this is the second part of those three, where we start this conversation of what is college, career, and life readiness, and how do we assess that, and what do we use to monitor that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Judy to lead our discussion.
And I am super excited to talk about this. The idea of skills and dispositions is a topic that we've talked about a lot with educators. It's very in the news and in the literature, I should say, not the news so much, but the contemporary educational literature. So I'm pretty excited to get to share this with you already. And we get to work through it together. So I'm going to start out with establishing my learning target for you. I'd like us to be able to practice the career and college readiness skills and dispositions, to encourage us to think about methods of influence for student success. So methods of influence for maybe board members, for teachers, for parents. So think about how can we influence student success based on these skills and dispositions. Then I'm going to walk through 3 different parts, our history and the starting point from this perspective. What are the skills and dispositions? What are they? And our next action, and that's going to be a status quo or an innovation kind of question. Okay. A very lengthy quote from the Council of Chief State School Officers. I'll give you a minute to read it, and then I'll highlight that is yellow. So this college and career readiness talks about 3 parts: knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So they've made reference to that. Then it talks about these higher order thinking skills: critical thinking, problem solving, working collaboratively, communicating well, learning how to learn, and as Tim often says, and unlearn. So this is where our starting point is. Some history then, getting into this, back when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was first passed, and then it became No Child Left Behind, and then it has recently become the Every Student Succeeds Act. But in its beginning, it really created a testing culture and established a more pervasive standardized tests, and those tests were very much about compliance and conformity. They were standardized, which allowed for comparisons across groups and between groups. It led to some test prep instead of getting ready for a test, using our time to do that versus the learning, which has been a concern to educators since the inception. Since about 2010, I've been doing presentations to you about how our standardized tests have changed over time. And they are less and less paper and pencil fill in the bubble, and all exactly the same, and becoming more adaptive in some cases, but electronic in almost all cases now. As a result of those kinds of assessments, then we've updated our curriculum materials, professional development has changed. We've made sure that our essential learning targets are aligned with our assessments. And increasingly it is a digital tool. So this quote comes from a book study that the administrators are working through right now called Beyond School Improvement: The Journey to Innovative Leadership. And to many leaders, the work is about improving student performance. And although that is the correct outcome of their efforts, we believe that it is the wrong starting point. Work is about facilitating improvement initiatives and leading innovative endeavors that transform the system of education, which leads to improved student performance. So it's kind of an approach to how we work with students toward that proficiency. So it calls us to be challenged to transform. The industrial change assets of compliance and conformity are not good matches for the conceptual age. Just in case you wondered what this age that we're in right now is called, conceptual age. In our conceptual age, successful workers will be those who understand and interpret the connections between diverse and seemingly separate disciplines. So at the bottom of the screen, I have those 3 parts that Tim referenced earlier. The knowledge, current content knowledge, that is either in your memory or you can access. The skills and dispositions, what are those? We're going to get to those in a minute. And then eventually, how do we weave those skills and dispositions together, drawing on that knowledge that it's either in our memory or accessible, and weaving that together that actually demonstrates the college career life readiness. Okay, so I think this was going to be our little task for this evening. I referred to this as my little meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a review of other people's reviews or collections of literature. And I found, I named 7 different sources, and those were linked in your materials. And went through those materials and said, what is it that we're looking at that constitute college and career life readiness? And so I made the table and then sorted which ones were referenced most often in the literature, in these 7 pieces of literature. And here's a snapshot of the top few. If you go to Wikipedia, you will find the same top 4 that were in this little meta-analysis. So they seem to kind of reoccur. The idea of collaboration, working with others, communicating effectively, that is listening, speaking, speaking to one other person, speaking in small groups, speaking in large groups, and writing for a purpose. Critical thinking, and this includes analyzing, reasoning, naming problems, solving problems, organizing your work, and then creativity. Those are sometimes called the 4 C's. Soon after that, we have learning, and learning how and how to not unlearn, rather. Initiative, adaptability, and you probably looked into that list that you got. It's also available for you in a hard copy. I'd like to have you participate in a little activity right now, which you may have read through these directions, but I'd like to give them again orally. I'm going to have you work with a person sitting near you and think about how are these things required in the work that I do? All of you are college or career and life ready because you're participating in it fully. So which of these skills and dispositions are reflected in your work? So to maybe think about that for a minute. You can start at the top, you can start at the bottom, but to take a minute and think, collaborate as a member of a team, cooperating with others. Do I do that in my daily life? Do I do that in my work? And then what I'd like you to do with your elbow partner is to share how that works. And each of you have pretty different roles, different life experiences, different employment. And so it could be really interesting to share with your partner, how is this reflected? So I'd like you to take a few minutes to work through those. And then if you feel like you've gotten through some of that, I'd like you to take a look at the second column from the left that asks you to think about how would you prioritize that particular skill and disposition over the others. So you might think that entrepreneurial skills and risk-taking are the most important thing. You'd give that a 1. You think creativity is a frivolous, unnecessary thing. You'd give that a 10, 15, whatever the number is on here. Okay? So there's really 2 things you can do. I'd like you to start out thinking and then sharing with a partner how this plays out in your world. And then if you have time, you can prioritize what you think is most important. So I'm just going to sort you quickly. If you 2 want to be partners. And then Tim and Donna, and Joe and Scott can work together, and Allison and Yoli Beth can work together, and Steve and John can work together. And, okay, and you and I can work together. There we go. So I'm
the
going to
audience?
take, pardon me?
What about the audience?
Is anyone work with Tim?
Oh, I was thinking they could do their own. It'll make you feel wanted.
I'm going to take about 5 minutes, so we can
That's
talk
what I
about it. I want you to have time to think.
Both sides?
Just, I would start with the front side rather than start.
Oh, gotcha.
Front side is the one that, let's see if I can follow. We had this linked here. Someplace? No. The one that has the header at the very top of the page, college career life readiness dispositions exercise for the Board of Education.
Can there be more than one of these to, like, a one is your priority? Okay.
The rules aren't very black and white here. It's about thinking through, what does this mean to me? Okay, so take a stab at it. I'll check in 5 minutes.
Everything I do. But they have to work with people.
Like everything I do.
I'm going for 5 seats.
Do we have to put a number, like personal priority?
Yeah, and like all 4
So what are these part of this? I mean, I know these are the 4 seats. Oh, okay, beside, okay. Thank you.
I think so.
Kind of. I walked out halfway through your instructions, so. I was just taking things that I think are true about my work.
So think about an example of how in your house you have to do this.
We want me to do this in 5 minutes?
Like really simple.
Okay.
That would be the communicating effectively. So it's just really quick, you know. I mean, I have to,
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these.
first thing Monday morning every week, it's important to have you know, those kind of things. So if you can give some examples, that will help.
I think these first.
academic skills.
Let's see how these will jump down to responsibility.
No, she said that. I have to do that every day with people on newspaper.
So what would you like to share with me, Joe?
I hate these things.
I know I do too. So of these meta-analysis things, what would you say is your number 1 priority?
my line of work,
Yeah.
it was hard for me to narrow down creativity and collaboration. Basically, what you need in this life, otherwise I'm just being able to say, sort of take your project and finish it real quick.
Right.
But I have not job. So,
Well, everybody's got a different job. No, for me, it would be the critical thinking skills. Well, because I get tons of information thrown at me all day long, every day, and it's very important to be able to identify the key issues or point of a court opinion or whatever it is, to be able to identify it very quickly. You know, like when he was talking about what see, cops don't charge people. I do that. They make a referral to review, but I have to decide what I'm going to do with it. And a lot of different factors go into that decision, and I have to do that many times a day, and I don't get a lot of time to do it. So the critical thinking skills. Yeah. So the ability to get to the point fast is really important for me. And
yeah, me, it's almost the opposite. You know, every year and everything. It's all, you almost have to slow down. Just make sure you start right. Sometimes just walk away from it.
Right.
Come back. But since we're on that, ready? To treat people with 3 or 4 people.
Right.
Yeah, you screw forward.
Well, I just put one next to things that I have to do all the time.
Not always.
Right.
Sometimes the
And
most
a
obvious
couple
way
of
is doing
these
something
years
is
is like very important, and then the rest are just, I don't know.
Well, and for me, part of it too is I've been doing this for 24 years.
Because it,
They're obvious
I mean,
patterns.
so many of these things to me are just woven together.
Obviously, for me, effective
Like this page seems to pull things out of like the front page, but maybe that's just my.
an argument.
So I'm an office
Succinctly,
manager.
I've got a judge
It's very small, so everyone is my boss. So I have to class.
I know more than the first page, I think
They work
probably
out of the
won't do
country
that
most of the time, so I
so
able to communicate with them.
well-worded, careful argument, you know, that's just
Technology.
for the record.
And all our clients speak different languages.
I know I've got issues.
So
Two
I
paragraphs.
have to be pretty adaptable.
Well, you know that at least,
Man,
so
I
that's
know
good.
that is right, you know, I'm going to take care of the office, so.
And, you know,
I
and that's
just
part of
picked out
the
all,
process.
List out all the things that
There are other
that they
challenges
rely
that
on
I
me
work
to do.
with. I know otherwise every scenario I figure out, we should probably do some line search.
Yeah, because we
When I
have
do need
we're
to price change, I have
like,
to
don't really have anything that's restricting me from
40 to
trying.
50% of my job.
So,
I'm just
I
by
guess
myself.
Yeah,
for me, I mean, I go from like keeping
Right.
books to
Because it can be really boring, repetitive work when you stop thinking about it.
proofing a
Right.
document, that a user's document that we're going to be sending out, so I have to be able to do that on the fly.
you know, and the third thing, I guess, for me is collaboration, because I have to work with so many different
You could have, you know, an editor.
It's the judges, it's my support staff, it's the attorneys in my office, the different law enforcement agencies, the cops that are in different cities,
Right.
child protective services.
And they give me,
You know, to be able to coordinate.
I mean, I think in a bigger position.
Yeah, well,
That's my,
that's what I,
for us, you know, large So what about you?
I'm also just which when I need to do it, it's less than half of my job.
I think for you, education,
I work at a place
and I've worked in large
Right.
I guess that is important.
Around
Still.
it's like you work, there's a group, you work in a small group, managed by somebody.
And for me, that's super important because
And so I think that a lot of
in the
these
legal
things
profession, people
are
have to trust each
adaptable to
other.
that as
As
well.
soon as we
It's got to
go
be
like
in
into the
collaboration,
profession,
it's probably super important.
being slang, we're not totally
You're
honest.
something, you're in a job that's super focused and you just have to produce.
Nobody believes you anymore. You gotta double check
Well,
everything to make
and
a
now
good thing. I mean, there are some
This
people that
is
work their jobs
critical
not often.
because we have to
I just assume
I
that
don't know.
come
I
up
mean,
with
I
an idea how we're gonna.
because it's that.
maybe see that in like.
Well, I mean, I think
Shut the conversation you're having
But
right
that's
now.
It really is rare.
cussing education, we're still in this assembly line.
Well, I also like
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Some of it gets
How do you do this?
I think actually the communication.
Well, then you can do everything we do here.
Right.
Then depending on what college. they're
But like
going
for
to,
me, creativity.
Okay, and let's bring your ideas to a close.
Small school.
Vital for what I do.
It's hard,
academic skills.
we have the
I didn't need
collaboration.
Yeah.
I love it's a little bit
Right.
I'd have to say that as the facilitator, the thing that brings me joy is there's this quiet, hard think thing that went on, and then this hum. Did you notice it?
Home.
It was this low conversation. It wasn't rowdy, you weren't hanging from the lights or anything. You were on task and you were having this conversation. You were communicating with one another, sharing ideas. Great eye contact. Great taking turns speaking. So you're practicing a lot of those communication skills, honestly, that we need to teach. We can't assume that our children will come in knowing how to do that. And we can't assume that the person the year before already finished teaching that, because they taught to a different developmental age than who is in front of me right now. So we have to keep practicing that. So this was an example of actually practicing many of those skills. Who'd be willing to share something that you heard from your partner that is an example of any of the things that were on this list? Now notice I didn't ask you to share what you said. I asked you to share who would be willing to share something you heard from your partner. Steve.
My partner was John. Is that enough?
No, he probably had lots of good ideas.
No, and in his world, creativity is really important. And but independent creativity that eventually brings to a collaborative point where team members are being creative, but bringing that to a collaborative point.
Thank
Really
you.
important for his line of work.
Thank you. Anybody else? Allison?
My partner was Jolie. And for her, they're working on, communication was kind of the most important thing. They're working on a Latino ministry, and they've formed a committee that's not really an approved committee just yet, so they're trying to get the information out to the community at large, as well as any of the administrative staff, to understand the purpose, what they're trying to do, and how to bring it all together. And that communication is kind of the hardest part and also the most important.
And a lot of the words you used, which were probably also the words that Yoli Beth used, are about deep, thoughtful, planful communication. And one more idea you'd want to share?
Tim and I talked, and I think what we realized is that we're really at opposite ends of the spectrum as far as like him being in an organization that is much more rigid and has a lot of structures in place. Mine being very small and having to just be able to do stuff on the fly because I'm the only person that does it. And how different we each approach our day to day, because he's more, he used the phrase that we're kind of sending kids, it's like a factory, they're going from class to class and grade to grade, didn't have to follow this thing, and for me that is like nothing like that at all.
Like that at all. And so,
but we have a lot of I looked at ours, our ones are, our number one priorities are kind of mostly the same, so it's interesting.
I think as in transitionally, and I'll take a launch from that, is that we need to be thinking about how we are preparing kids for the other side, for post-secondary experiences, for career, for life, that they have to have a chance to practice all of these things. Isabel was noticing. Do you want to share what you were noticing?
Yeah, I mean, we ranked communicate effectively as number 2, and I think within kind of like what you were talking about with the whole factory thing, that it does kind of feel like that a lot, like that we're just being talked at, and I think that's why a lot of kids don't really know how to communicate effectively, but there are also like lots of opportunities that you're able to learn how to do that. Like I'm involved in North Star. I think Striley's out there somewhere. And Striley's the advisor. And I mean, opportunities like that really teach you a lot of good life skills and how to collaborate and communicate and work towards a common goal. So I think that a lot of it just has to do with initiative, another one of the things on this list, and like going out and seeking those types of opportunities.
Thank you. Can put you on the spot here. But to make sure that these opportunities are available in school during the day, you will also find opportunities outside of school, of course. But these would be considered those skills and dispositions. So when we talk about, when we use the word skills and dispositions of college and career life readiness, these are the kinds of things we're talking about. And the previous slide talked about the knowledge, the content we have to have. You have to be working with content to even practice these skills and dispositions. And then how does this all weave together in an application? So thank you for participating in that exercise with me. This table just sort of summarizes the 3 parts Tim introduced to you as I was coming to speak with you. Content knowledge would be mathematics and reading and writing and science, social studies, the arts, technical skills, technical learning, wellness, all of those things that you have to know the content about or be able to access. And then the metric for accountability there are standardized tests, yes, but also classroom assessments to inform the next instruction. And our literature base right now is telling us how important it is to give full value to those classroom assessments to inform our instruction, and not just wait for a standardized test to tell you whether you did it or you didn't do it. Performance tasks are really important. I was able to lean in and listen to what it was you were saying. Steve, for instance, has a 5th C he wants to add to the list here. Do you want to share that, Steve?
Yes, I will share the 5th C that I think is really, really important, and that is change management.
Change management. So we have to think about now, how does that fit in with the rest of these?
It kind of, to me, summarizes learning how to learn and unlearn, as well as adaptability and flexibility, and maybe a few others that are on the back.
Yep, I agree. And so part of the metric then also is being able to collect this information from performance tests and classroom assessments and, yes, standardized tests, and look at it longitudinally to be able to analyze that and inform how are we doing about making sure this learning, that students have the opportunity to do this learning. And then the skills and dispositions, which we've just worked through now, communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and a whole list of other things. Metrics for for giving feedback or being accountable to these are not standardized tests. You can't, this is really hard to measure on a standardized test. And yet I think you would all agree that it's super important stuff. And so educators are encouraged to use rubrics, and there are some examples if you click on that link that define, here would be an exemplar example of this work, and here's getting ready for that, and here's just barely getting started for that. So kids can see, oh, this is what it would look like when I am proficient. We can maintain a record of that longitudinally also and use it to give feedback to kids. That kind of feedback one-to-one is huge in influencing students' ability to perform with those skills and dispositions.
So are we currently using a rubric of sorts at the
Very
various
often,
levels? Okay.
very often. In both, really we use rubrics in both the content knowledge and the skills and dispositions. Most performance tasks would come with a rubric rather than a test, a multiple choice test or something afterwards. Student maintained digital portfolio would be an awesome place for students to own this idea, and the more that they own the learning and the thinking, the more it is represented in their work. Classroom visits and feedback can come from peers or from administrators and say, recognize what's going on in the classroom and make commendations about that. And educators are encouraged to analyze their tasks, the tasks they give to students. It references DOK3 there, that's the depth of knowledge that is required to perform the task. Is it a low level do this, or does it require some critical thinking? So there can be some analysis in even the tasks that we offer students. And then the engagement and application part, how do we weave the seemingly separate things all together in application or in service? And that we will come back and speak to later. I don't think we have a date for that one yet. The results from the Phi Delta Kappa poll that was literally just published, I was working on the presentation when this came to me. There were 7 or 8 big ideas, but 2 of them jumped out at me and I had to share. Americans overwhelmingly want schools to do more than educate students academically. That means blending work readiness, personal skills, and academic courses. It isn't one or the other. It's all of it that we want for our kids. And then the second point, most public school parents expect their child to attend college full-time, but that may not mean a 4-year college. So any kind of technical, really, there's even some experiential kinds of things that would fall into that. How might this look different than when we were in school? I've made several links here. We're not going to watch them tonight, but I might have intrigued you enough to say, well, this would look a little different than when I was in school. And so they're very short vignettes. These come from the teaching channel. What I'm doing here is modeling an example of curating good examples for you to look at. The teaching channel has hundreds of these vignettes on many, many topics, but what I've done is tried to find one from each level and a part for the teacher role. So I've kind of curated that for you. It's a really important part of the teacher role when we want the teacher to not be talking the whole period. So I have many other important roles. So the literature and practice demonstrate that student-driven learning changes the trajectory of their success. When students own the work, when they're doing the thinking and they're asking the questions, defining the problems, thinking about what it could be, it's grounded still in the content knowledge. So it's within our essential learning targets. We're not all over the place here. Within our essential learning targets, what it is we want kids to know and be able to do. But then we build in the skills and dispositions so they have that practice for those other skills that they have to have in post-secondary success. So an important thing that I should do in reviewing what we've done here this evening, we came from a starting point and we looked at an industrial compliance and conformity model which established schools decades and decades ago, led into standardized tests that were very much about exactly the same thing at the same time. Then we spoke of the college and career readiness skills and dispositions. We just worked through a lot of those. And the next idea then that we have to launch into and think about is, do we want it to be the way it is right now? Because that's the way it was for me. Or do we want to think about how school might be a little bit different, or maybe even a lot different, so that kids have the opportunity to blend knowledge learning with skills and dispositions, and then find those applications in service where it all comes together. Without innovation, we are perfectly situated to prepare our kids and see achievement results, as we always have. That's kind of a hard point. And so at the end of my time with you, I would come back to my essential learning targets. We have practiced the college and career readiness skills and dispositions for consideration. And how might that influence your contribution towards student success? So now that you've had a little bit of time, really little bit of time, to think about skills and dispositions in conjunction with the knowledge. How might that contribute to student success? And then near your station, you have a note card. This is used commonly in classrooms. It's called an exit card. Looks like an index card. That the educator would suggest, I need to know something from you. I need to get some feedback from you to know what to do next. And so my prompt to you is, how might tonight's learning influence your work as a board member? You get to write that down. You may add your name if you want me to know that, and otherwise I don't know your handwriting, so I would use it as an aggregate to help us know what we need to be learning next. So I'll be quiet for a little bit. How might tonight's learning influence your work as a board member? As you finish up your ideas, I will share the credits, my reference sources, and ask if you have any insight, ideas, or questions.
I have a question. Could you describe, is perseverance resiliency, or are they two different things?
I think would say they're two different things. Perseverance, kind of a stick-to-itiveness. I am determined to figure this out. I'm going to stick with it until I do. Resiliency would be more like I can deal with a lot. I have, be it trauma or be it too much to do all at once, but I am going to bounce back.
So if we were to go with that, then that they're two different things, I'm wondering why resiliency isn't on this list. Because I think for a lot of kids, at least if they don't struggle at all through school, and everything comes super easy, and they're masters of, you know, the content and understanding things, and then they get out in the world, they've not had a lot of opportunities to fail and to learn from those failures that, you know, life goes on. And I'm wondering if that is is that something schools are supposed to be responsible for building, or is that, you know, does that come from someplace else? Because perseverance, I think, to me, would say the stick-to-itiveness, you have to be engaged, and you have to want to stick with it until you get it. But if you know, if you're not even at that point, that's a totally, you know, then it doesn't make a difference. And I do see some kids, you know, that have done great in high school, model students. And they're going to go places, and then they hit some rough patches, and their life changes pretty dramatically. And I'm wondering what responsibility we think we may have in trying to foster that.
I believe we have responsibility for that. Not exclusive responsibility, but responsibility to make sure that there is adequate challenge for everyone. And I think that it is not hard to build in when the kids are doing the work versus me doing the work. So the prompts that I ask of students, the choice that they might have, the interest areas they might get to pursue within our essential learning targets, I think is the way to do that, to get them engaged. They'll keep working on it. I do think we have a responsibility to do that. I do think it's unfortunate for kids to get to skate through school. That is no gift that we are giving them. If it is easy and you didn't have challenge.
Well, yeah, it almost seems like the kids that struggle have learned those life lessons at a time when it's safe. But then they can use them later on, and I know it seems sort of counterintuitive to most folks, but it is kind of a toughie.
Questions or comments about any of that? John?
Yeah. So you spoke a little bit about student-driven learning. Can you speak at all about not just how we might, or maybe less about how we might create curriculum that fosters student-driven learning, but methods that a program built around student-driven learning can use to ensure student engagement? It sounds like it would be hard to get a kid interested when you're putting more on their shoulders. Or I'm just curious what teachers can do to.
It's a little bit different a mindset. So when I was in school, there was this textbook I had to eventually read. There was this content I was accountable to, and it just was. In a student-centered or student-driven environment, we know what we need the kids to know and be able to do, and it's defined as a learning target, and it is the content defined by our standards. But within that big target idea, there are many many subtopics that would go into that. And to have students be introduced to the idea that there are many subtopics within this big idea that you could learn, and you could find one that is intriguing to you. It would be completely different than what Steve is doing, and completely different than what Yolden Beth is doing, But when you bring your task and your action and your learning together, you and Steve and everyone else in your class, you have shared a much richer, broader ideas about this target than if you all learned the same thing. Difficult to test in a standardized or a common kind of test, but given a prompt that reflects the target, you can draw on everything you learn and bits and pieces from things other people have shared. We know that kids learn a ton from other kids. Sadly, much more than they ever learn from me. But to be aware of that is to take advantage of kids interacting and sharing those ideas. It's really kind of a mind shift from here are the facts that you have to know. But in an industrial age, when you had to know them because you didn't have access to those facts, if you didn't know them, they weren't anywhere. And now they are. And I don't have to know them. I have to know they exist. I have to know where to access them. And then from those ideas, what am I most interested in? That I want to tease out of this essential learning target. That alone is a thing we have to teach kids to do. Because for the most part, we have taught them not to do that. We have taught them, I'll tell you what you need to know, and you're going to tell it back to me.
So is there a model for
there are many instructional delivery models, yes. I wouldn't say it's like a template, though. And a lot of it is more about how I structure my classroom and my instructional delivery, what I will accept from the students, what I allow the students to do together, than it is a template for how to do it. But I think if you, some of that question you might be able to view in the vignettes that are linked to the slides, but I love to talk about this topic, so we could do that as often as you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question or comment. I think, first of all, this was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
And I'm very encouraged by some of the things going on in the district and some of the things we've had discussions about, because I think they align with this, whether it's the play-based learning that we have going, the move at Kaganza to inquiry-based. I think that all aligns with this. I think that, and this is probably more of a diatribe. I don't want it to be. So I'm going to try to phrase it as a question, but we also in education, as a society, I'm not necessarily saying Stoughton, have become very standardized. And it's not just learning standards, but we've standardized how teachers teach. And I'm not sure how to phrase this in a way that's going to make sense. And I wonder how we make that connection, I think, because we standardize so many things, and we've done it in the name of accountability. I said that at the last meeting. All I hear about is accountability, accountability, accountability. And I'm not sure how a teacher fosters a lot of this stuff when they have, in order to do this, we have to have teachers, we have to have educators, we have to have superintendents and principals willing to take risks and fail. But we also have to hold people accountable. And I'm just struggling with that. I think more from a overall educational standpoint. Like I said, I'm very encouraged by some of the stuff that we have going here in Stoughton, and that I feel like we're on the right track. What's your take on that, or where do you think we need to go to find that sort of marriage between accountability, yet encouraging risk and failure, and not having that be punitive?
Right. I think grades are an issue. Points are an issue. But there's a really hard question between status quo and innovation.
Right.
And that is not something that you just say, okay, let's do it differently.
Right.
Because it's decades of the way we have always done it that we need to transition, hopefully quicker than the decades we've spent doing it. I do think student-owned portfolios where I can name resilience or perseverance or creativity and say, Isabel, I need you to put something into your portfolio that demonstrates this. and she picks what it is that demonstrates her perseverance. And then she ultimately is able to share that portfolio with someone accountable. She could change her mind. This represented resiliency in September. I got a way cooler thing I'm putting in there right now because this was really tough. Pulling this one out, putting this one in. But she made the decision about what that was.
Right.
And to have teachers conferring with her, she's got nothing in there on creativity. Is it because she doesn't understand what creativity is or how she presents it or how it could look? I get pretty jazzed about that idea. It's very different than grades. And so we have to work in a system that we haven't done away with yet. I think that is our harder challenge.
I think that maybe a way that we on the board ought to be thinking about that is there are rules we got to follow that have to do with standardized tests and reporting scores and grades. And there's really no way that we can't assign grades to high school kids, for example, because when they apply to colleges and so forth, there's nothing there, and that's the first screener for a lot of institutions. But this personal portfolio seems to me like it could be an excellent supplement to those number things. It's kind of like your resume that you build throughout your career as you're moving along from one business to the other, one job to the next. A large part of applying for colleges often is you have to write a personal essay. Well, maybe you take that portfolio and kind of condense it or highlight it or something like that as your personal statement about who I am and why I would be good at this school or why I would be good at this job. And it isn't just for applying to academic institutions either. I think that certainly our parents need to learn more about this. Because I think that given an opportunity to learn about it, I think they would be very excited about it and very supportive as well. Because right now all we've got is the numbers. I've got a 3.2, I got an X on the ACT or whatever it is, and that's not real interesting, and it doesn't tell us much either usually.
Right, but it is an indicator.
It's
so
one.
I'm totally with you on that. I can't disregard that number, but as you suggest, a supplement to that number. Imagine someone coming to work for you that wants to talk about their resiliency and their perseverance and their collaborative nature. Well, yeah, I got a job opening for you.
Right, and maybe that 2.9 or whatever the grade point is suddenly doesn't matter that much.
Student gets straight C's. Creativity. Critical thinking.
Very good. Yes.
Change management.
Change management.
Change management. Yes.
So other questions or comments from anybody? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Judy.
Grab your note cards on the way by here, and thank you for indulging me in the exercise.
Oops. Sorry. So Judy, we look forward to hearing back from you again in the not too distant future. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple discussion action items. One of which is the compensation committee. We've got a couple policies. We've got security cameras. So first up is the compensation committee and our directions to it as to how to move forward from tonight onward. And to get that discussion going, I would entertain a motion so that we can talk about it. Donna?
I move that we give the compensation committee additional time to continue their work with a third-party facilitator and direct them to explore potential compensation models with all options remaining on the table for exploration and consideration. And I would further move that the committee must share the unapproved minutes from its meeting within 5 days of the meeting, and that a final recommendation will be given to the board at the first meeting in, what is that, May 1st? That's 6 months?
After the reorganization.
After the reorganization meeting, whenever that occurs, sometime the first week of May.
Okay, there's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Steve?
Question on the second. Can it be modified slightly?
No.
Okay.
No,
John
amendments to a motion would come after the second.
Thank you. John second.
Okay, seconded. So, discussion then. Did you have something you wanted to say, Steve?
I would like to see in the recommended action that there's regular update reports. So more than just the meeting minutes, but progress reports.
Yeah, I would concur. Regular updates to the board, so we can have some dialogue. I think we've gotten to a place. I respect the work of the committee. I think they're going to do a great job, but I don't want to get to our decision time and not really have that opportunity to have that discussion.
Okay, well, hang on. So you've offered an amendment to the motion.
Mm-hmm.
Donna, will you accept
Yes.
that amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Okay, and John, you're okay seconding that amendment?
Yes.
Okay. So then discussion on that. You want regular updates in addition to the minutes being recorded 5 days after a meeting?
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
And frankly, that's what we've been doing. But yeah, obviously we need to keep track of this. Did you have something, John?
Yeah, can I assume that the third-party facilitator is Woods, or is that potentially going to change?
I guess I'd defer to Tim on that.
Right now, if the board goes in this direction, I think with the timeline of this year, changing a facilitator at this point, I think will be counterproductive.
Right.
That's why I'm asking. I mean, we've got an investment into it at this point, so.
Right.
I need a clarification on something when you say, with all the options on the table, what exactly that means?
Means exactly that.
I mean, like, so like we were discussing last meeting, like, considering anything, we're talking even considering like a step on lanes and modify, so
Right.
there is no restriction, that's what I'm asking. Is
That's
what it
the
means?
motion. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of understand why you are a little bit confused, because one of the problems I had was just a wording thing where it says all options remaining on the table. Some of those options were not previously on the table for the committee to consider. So I think what Joey's is wanting clarification on is, are those options now something that can be considered? And it's my understanding that that's the case, yes.
Right, that's the motion, all options on the table. Further questions or discussion on that? We all got Tim's, I think, lengthy and I think very well thought out comments regarding this whole process and where we should go forward. And one issue that Tim brought up is whether the current plan should be, for want of a better term, simply scrapped from this moment forward. And I think Tim laid out some reasons why that would make sense. He also mentioned a reason or two why that might be problematic. I think if we're going to give this direction to the compensation committee, we probably also need to consider, and we can do that in a separate motion, whether we're going to remain committed to the present system that we have right now. And I guess, Tim, I don't know if you want to recap your reasons for doing that.
It's, as I said in the email, If we're truly serious about changing the model, and we all can identify and we can all agree upon it, and I think the SEA sitting in the audience would agree with me, that there are some major flaws in our current system. And so if we're committed to changing the model and coming up with a true model, why would we keep implementing a flawed system? And yes, I know that that is going to probably make some people unhappy. But right now, I think implementing this flawed system is having an adverse effect on our district, in my opinion. And so the committee cannot focus on making changes to the current system and coming up with a new system all within that aggressive timeline. So the only thing then, if we keep the current system, we will continue to operate under the current system flaws and all. And I don't think that's in anybody's best interest.
I just one sec. I bring that point up because I think it does have bearing on the motion that Donna has made. We can direct that committee to come up with a recommendation by the first meeting in May. But I think that's going to be really, really hard. Because essentially we're saying start this whole 4-year process all over again. Now granted, there's been a lot of work and a lot of discussion that will go into that hopefully won't mean it's another 4 years until we get a recommendation. But what I'm getting at is under the current model, people can apply to level over, which can come with pay increases, etc. At the same time, we're acknowledging that we're not going to keep that system forever. And I think we have to be honest that a deadline of first week or first meeting in May not be met. They may not make that. And that means that we may not have a new compensation model until the 1920 school year. So what do we do in the meantime?
I think Tim laid that out, didn't he, in his email?
Well, no, 1920.
Yeah,
Yes.
The 1920.
Right. So yeah, what do we do in the meantime? Do we keep trying to implement this system, or do we just let the ERC work out what modifications to compensation happen in the interim? So again, I think that scrapping the present system requires a separate motion, but I do think that it has bearing on the motion that's before the board right now. Donna?
I understand everything you're saying, and I think there's some merit to it, but I will say that I'm not comfortable voting on that in one meeting. We don't ever do that. We have a 2-step process. I would want time to think about it, and I would like to wait to hear some input from people before, and I don't think life is going to stop if we postpone that decision for a little bit. But I think it's premature to make that. I think what's more important is that we get this committee going in a way that they say that they can, that will help them move forward, and then we look at the other issue separately.
I agree with that. I wouldn't feel comfortable voting right now, but there are so many questions that I think discussion that we have to do right before.
Well, and I wasn't suggesting that we have to do it tonight either,
right.
but I do think that's a decision point that we're going to get very, very soon. Yeah. And in fairness, I think we have to do that. Yeah, John.
So if that's a discussion that we're interested in having in the very near future, once we make a decision there, is it still possible for us to in any way modify the direction that we've given the committee in this motion that's forward right now, to include however we decide to manage the current compensation plan?
I'm not following.
Well, you mentioned that you felt that considering the current compensation plan and whether or not we maintain it while the committee is working separately, in some way informs the motion that we have in front of us right now.
I think it does, just because of the timeline.
Right.
That's what I was getting at, yeah.
So I guess then I'm just trying to figure out if then we, in the near future, consider a change or potentially scrapping the current compensation model. Would that decision just speak for itself relative to the committee, or would we have to go back and then re-inform the committee about or with further direction?
I don't think that it would change our directions to the committee to come up with something with all options on the table.
Okay.
But it might lend some immediacy to them getting a recommendation.
Right now, as administration, the career ladder has been approved by the board. That is our compensation model.
Right.
So we take that document, and as administration, we have to implement that document, flaws and all. And so your direction on, so it's kind of two different issues. One is the direction to the committee and what to work. The other is the direction to administration of how we're moving forward with compensation with our staff that fall under this model.
But they are related, that's
Right,
why I
they are
brought it
related.
up. Yeah. Other questions?
Well,
Allison?
I guess that was part of what I was wondering. If we scrap or repeal the current plan, what do we use?
Then it's strictly employee relations committee, somewhat through negotiations and somewhat through a recommendation with the board on supplemental pay, because Act, is it 10 or 35, I keep mixing up what was in what, says that the only thing that we can bargain is the CPI. But the board can then give additional compensation or supplemental compensation above the CPI. So then it would be up to the Employee Relations Committee to make a recommendation to the entire board of how to distribute that money or what do you do, and then the board ultimately having that final decision.
Right, and just as a reminder, the board did give authority to the Employee Relations Committee on how much of an increase, what our maximum increase would be for the current school year. So that number, at least, has already been arrived at for this current contract.
Right.
So any further questions or discussion on the motion that Donna made and that John seconded?
It was amended by
And amended
Steve,
by, right, amended by Steve, thank you. Okay?
Sorry, I
Oh,
do
I'm
have
sorry,
one
go
more
ahead.
thing. Why, I know we've kind of talked about this in years past, why have it necessarily be after reorganization?
I think realistically, that's just how long it's going to take. I think that's a big factor right there. I think frankly, as another, we're going to have at least 3, possibly 4 seats up for election in the spring.
In the spring.
Which means we might have 4 new board members.
Right.
And I think it makes better sense for the board that's going to have to live with that decision to make that decision.
Okay. All right, I see that.
Does that make sense to you?
Right.
I mean, that's my opinion. Others
Yeah.
might feel different.
No, I just know, I mean, in the
Yeah.
past, we've talked about, well, let's do this with the board we have, rather
I
than the
know.
one we'll get, and so, you know.
I think even a May deadline is pretty optimistic. Donna?
Before we vote, could Becky just read back the motion that was made so that we are clear?
The amended motion reads, move that we give the compensation committee additional time to continue their work with a third-party facilitator and direct them to explore potential compensation models with all options remaining on the table for exploration and consideration. We further move that the committee must share the unapproved minutes from its meetings within 5 days of their meeting and that a final recommendation will be given to the board at the first meeting in May following the reorganization meeting, with regular progress updates / reports to the board.
Is that what everybody remembers?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So unless there's any further discussion or questions, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries then. Thank you, board members, and we, I think, should get a written copy of that to the compensation committee, maybe tomorrow even. Okay, and I will put the compensation committee on the agenda again, not necessarily on the 18th, well, probably on the 18th, because I do think that we've got to think about what we're going to do with our present compensation model. So keep that in the front of your minds over the next couple of weeks as to what your thoughts are on that. Okay, next up, security cameras. Is that you, Paul?
Well, this is a discussion, so you need a motion and you're gonna...
Right. And I believe we have a suggested motion, don't we? I guess I'd like Paul here because I know there are going to be some questions.
I move approval to give the Buildings and Grounds Department and the Technology Department the authority to install security cameras in all buildings.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Second. All right, discussion. Yoli.
Well, I have some questions about, like, because I saw the amount of that is expected for that. I don't remember if you presented like a schedule of things, and also, do we have all that money? I mean, how is this gonna happen?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, one, final budgets haven't been set yet because we don't know the state's final budget. So that would be something we'd consider. We'd look at a timeline, we'd look at the resources available. We'd continue to have discussion on phase 1, phase 2, all of those things. Right now, what the motion is giving pretty much, Paul's department and Cal's department the authority to install them. Then the actual implementation, the actual timeline, and whether it's over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years would be details that we'd have to look at using our current resources and multi-year plan if necessary.
And about those plans, does it include like, is there any way we can find grant money or?
I'm not aware of any grants that are out there currently for security cameras.
But there's some for
But to be fair, I
security.
haven't really pursued it that aggressively. So that could be a fair option to pursue.
Okay, thank you.
Donna?
I am not saying that I'm opposed to the security cameras in general, but I am really uncomfortable with the speed at which we are proceeding with kind of a big decision. I don't think that we've gotten input from everybody that we should be getting input from. I've spoken to some other principals at some other schools who do not think that cameras are going to make that much of a difference. And it's a really large amount of money. I mean, some comment was made to me that we could take that money and put it into other ways to promote the behavior that we're looking for. I am just wondering that we have a few more cons than we have pros. And I think we really need to get some input from stakeholders. I mean, there may be just an educational component for parents. What does this mean? We discussed it a little tiny bit in policy today. I mean, there's got to be some policies around how would these cameras be used? How long would we store the footage? Who can ask for the footage? Who can see the footage? I just feel like we are going a little too quickly, and I would ask just that we maybe have a little bit more time. As I understood it last time, the decision was just going to be to allow you to go out for bids, but that the actual decision of whether we were doing it was still going to happen. And so if it is for the actual installation, I'm not sure that I'm ready to vote for that.
Steve?
I agree with Donna. I think we are moving too fast. I don't see that it's been connected completely to all of the policy, as Donna mentioned. It was originally brought up that it supports ALICE, which is active shooter situations, but it seemed like the focus the last meeting was around other student activity. I'm all for student safety, I agree, but it just needs to be connected a little bit better. So I can't really support this at this time.
Other questions or comments?
I do support this, at least at the high school level. Having worked in schools, I do think that based on what I heard last week, we are a little behind. I do, although, hear what Donna and Steve are saying in regards to making sure we have policies to address this, but I have a great deal of faith in the administration, Mike Cruz, our SRO, to use these responsibly until we get those policies up to speed. From my experience, this is a very good thing to do from a security standpoint. I do understand what people are saying, though, and I do think we can get those sort of policy things figured out fairly quick. But I do have concerns that, from what I know about this from experience and from what was presented last week, that we are a little behind, at least at the high school. I do see, we have to be a little bit careful about the speed of implementation, I think more from a budgetary standpoint, or with the other schools. But from the high school level, I really feel like this is a need that we got to get moving on. That's my feeling.
I could support the RFP process, as Donna mentioned, move approval to move forward with the RFP. That way we at least have it in our pocket. And if we can get the other I's and dotted and the T's crossed in between now and then.
Okay. Other questions or comments? You only?
No,
oh, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Well, I agree with both Donna and Steve, and somewhat Tim. I mean, I think the problem is just what Donna said. We've moved too fast. I don't think anybody's necessarily saying no, but I guess I'm wondering, Donna, if you can be a little bit more specific about what information you want and what shareholders you want to reach out to, and kind of about how long that would take to do, because I don't feel like we need to move with breakneck speed on this. I mean, if we're talking about everybody being comfortable, if we have another 2 months, or I don't know what amount of time we're talking about, but if we can get more comfortable and do more educating in a reasonable amount of time, I think that's where I'm at. I mean, I'm basically in favor of the idea, but I think these are really good questions that.
Yeah, I would say ideally, in implementation, I know last time somebody had asked when we could have this implemented, which kind of gave me the feeling that you wanted to move quickly on it. But actually, like, winter break is really not an ideal time to do implementation. Summer would be more of an ideal implementation. So if we give us time, we reach out to shareholders, different focus groups during that time, cross our T's, dot our I's, come back and present some more information that would hopefully answer your questions. That would actually work better with our timeline, just in terms of implementation. I mean, we would really be rushing and cramming it in. There's a lot of wiring that has to take place if we're to move forward. Winter break is probably not an ideal time, either way.
Allison?
I think, just kind of answering your question, that I think was to Donna, but one of the groups of people I'd really like to hear from is parents. I know I have talked to some parents just in the last week, and of course we had a holiday break in there, so it was really difficult, I think, for community members to be able to kind of know what we were talking about and what kind of a timeline we were looking at. So the concerns I have heard from the community is, why are we jumping on this so fast? And I agree. I think reaching out, especially to parents in particular, because their kids are going to be the ones at the schools, and knowing what we're going to do with the information. I mean, how, you know, what kind of policies, like just pulled up our policy on surveillance, and, I'm not sure at what point do we have an overreach? Do we need to have other policies in place? Because right now I have faith in the administration that we have. It may not be that way in 10, 20 years. So what do we do with the information, and do we need some additional policies to support what we do?
I think, John,
Yeah. So I think I was struck last week by the safety implications that security camera system would provide, and also the opportunity for law enforcement to have or to be able to build a better story for any potentially violent crimes that occur in the high school. And so I had been feeling confident that this was a direction that we should move forward with, or could move forward with quickly. However, I understand the policy concerns, and so I'm curious what can we, or what would we plan to do in the meantime if we were to push back away from winter break and move towards summer break? What would we do in the meantime to ensure that when summer rolls around and security cameras could potentially be installed, that we would be comfortable from a policy, or comfortable with our policy? I guess I'm not as familiar with how the policy committee operates for example, like a potential system that we don't actually have in place yet.
Donna?
Well, I think it's more about learning what other administrators and directors feel about the potential. Is there going to be benefit? Because we hear the word deterrence, and I just talked to two different principals, and Kelly Melcher has been in another district, and she does have a little bit of concern about the deterrence factor, that's not going to really stop kids. In the meantime, I'm worried about the other things, and maybe we need to just talk to some other districts to see how they've done it. I wouldn't want us to be, it to be used to profile certain kids. I really have a concern about it being at the elementary school, as phase 2. But I know kids may, you just learn to outsmart the cameras. And so if it's not really gonna help that much, then I would, I guess I'm not saying that I'm opposed, because I thought I was kind of convinced last week, but then as I thought about it and I read about it, I think there are some things that we just need to think about. And so maybe there's like a learning session that needs to occur, or maybe we have a meeting, like a listening session with community members, and just kind of hear what people have to say. I'd like to hear from other administrators than just the high school principal. I'd like to, to hear from other people, school counselors, just what do they think? I mean, does that seem like that's something we could do? I mean, we haven't even really heard from Tim, like what, if he even recommends it or not. It's a lot of money that I think we could do some good with in the meantime.
Well, besides hearing from community members and other schools too, I would like to see if there any research that really show us that all the benefits, and that we can see well before and after having cameras. And it may change from elementary, of course, to middle school and to high school. Maybe we just could think about really to high school, for example. But I would like to see something that tells me this is really worth it, and that there is not that many concern from other people that are we're not gonna be impacted by it.
Steve?
I've looked through all of the policies over the past 6 months, and it's occurred to me that while we have safety plans for each school, I've never seen them. I don't know where they're held. I don't know if they're publicly available, but it's just, I go back to the I's and the T's. I just don't know how it's all connected. So I think there is a learning opportunity here. Sharing the safety plans. I mean, have you guys, Donna, you're the longest person here, I think, on the board. Have you ever seen the safety plans?
Mm-hmm.
You have. Are they available for folks to look at?
Yeah.
Are they available for the public to look at?
I believe those are public documents,
Are
aren't
they?
they?
I tried to find them on
I've just seen it as a
our.
binder. I don't think they're public because, for very obvious reasons.
Okay.
They did convert the safety plan to a website that is available. I'll have to check to see what the permissions are on there.
I guess-
It could be that's contained within the district, but you would certainly have access to that as being part of it.
They're very detailed. I mean, when it was on paper, it was
It
like
was a
this.
binder, yeah.
I just trying to link it all together to the, the value of the cameras. I mean, obviously Allison brought up the fact that we have policy on surveillance, and it does mention we approve the installation of cameras in the schools, but.
Right, well, we have cameras on buses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, but I just think that I don't understand why we have to rush. And so, I mean, I just want this to be as thoughtful as possible. And if Paul is saying that the middle of the year is not really convenient, then it seems like it's not convenient. So let's take some time to study it a little bit more. And I would we thought, last week I had suggested we add River Bluff in there because we thought there were some discipline concerns. We hear there are discipline concerns. Maybe we should really find out, are there discipline concerns? I mean, we don't really know for sure. So it seems like there's just a lot more information that we really need to learn before we can move forward with such a big thing. And maybe there's some things we could do to the cameras that we already have that maybe they're a little bit, make them better.
They're all external.
Right, but I mean, I have been told that our external cameras aren't the greatest. Maybe, maybe that's the first step. We work on, that, but I wouldn't know because we haven't really been presented with that information.
Well, could I suggest, if somebody would like to amend the motion to authorize facilities to get requests for proposals and bring them back to the board? Because these are just estimates that you gave us, right, Paul?
Yep.
Okay. Because what I'm hearing is that there are a fair number of people who'd like to, say, slow down. And I think that the cost is a legitimate issue. We don't know yet what the state's going to be giving us. If we did all of this in one budget year, we're looking at close to 200 grand, which is a big chunk of money. So Donna made the motion so that we could get the discussion going. I would entertain an amendment to that motion if anybody's interested, or we can vote on it now.
Can I ask one more question of Paul? All right. If we got bids right now, they usually last for 30, 60 days, maybe 90 at the most.
Right.
Would it be even worthwhile to do that now?
I mean, I guess it really depends. I mean, these are really ballpark figures. It just gave us something to work with, so we started having a conversation. If you're more interested in seeing a more accurate cost, we could certainly go out for bid and do that. But if we're not entertaining the thought of having it implemented prior to this coming summer, then I would say it probably wouldn't make much sense at this point. But if you're interested in more of like, okay, we have ballpark figures, we want to dig in a little bit deeper, we could certainly do that.
Okay.
We're gonna have to write it either way, so.
So the idea of going to RFP tonight isn't necessarily beneficial, is that what you're saying?
Not if we're not entertaining the idea of having it implemented prior to next summer.
Okay. Did you have a question, John?
Yeah, well, I don't know how we're gonna land on amending this or not, but if we are going to amend it, I would like to amend it in a way that we're only talking about basically the high school and the middle school. Because I think we would need to do that and see how it goes before we would even consider putting cameras in the elementary schools. I mean, if that comes up as something that I have to vote on as an all-in-one thing, I can't get there. I can get there if we put cameras in the high school and middle school and it works well. And there's a reason to go to the elementaries, but just as a big bundle, I can't see myself.
I think the high school is the immediate need, based on what I heard from Mike, Cruz, and Todd, and Cal, is when incidents happen, all the examples they laid out last week, in people come and say, okay, show me the footage, and they have nothing, it's kind of, I don't want to say unheard of, but they kind of look at us like, well, we need some footage. And so I think the immediate need is at the high school. There's been scenarios that have gone on there where cameras could come into play and they could be helpful in the investigation. Quite honestly, nobody's mentioned anything from River Bluff. Nobody's mentioned anything from the elementary perspectives. That would be a case where I would say, yeah, I mean, let's look a little bit further and let's talk with the principals there, get their thoughts on it. But I do think the high school, they have expressed need ever since I've been in the district. That's been for 5 years, and that we need some internal cameras. So I do think the high school is the immediate need at this point. And if we want to pursue, I think we laid out phase 2 as just like, here's what it would be if we wanted to continue on. But I don't think the elementary is immediate need at this point.
Other question, Alice?
Sorry, now I have two things. If we did that at the high school, I still feel we need a little more time, just for community input, because we just talked about this a week ago. There's been a holiday break, and now here we are voting on it, and I just think the community and parents and students should be able to weigh in.
Okay.
But that, I mean, that makes sense. Like you said, that's kind of the immediate need, and we know that Mike Cruz has asked.
And like, I could totally live with that. I just felt like we're just moving really quickly without giving ample time for some input. And maybe we aren't going to get any input.
Maybe we won't.
If you're saying that it's easier to install during the summer, then I don't know why we even would rush this. And then, you know, that we just bring it back at the appropriate time, but like allow for some sort of session to happen that we could give people opportunity, even if it's informal, I guess, just.
Right.
Are we doing are we doing a survey anytime soon?
Yeah.
And then my other question with that was, one of the things we talked about last week was storage. And so that was for 10 days of storage or whatever, and that storing it longer to make it more cost effective would mean probably looking at cloud storage. And I guess I would like a little more information about how that works, because the cloud is somebody else's computer. And I just kind of want to know what happens with that. So just another concern, and we don't have to address it right now.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here are my thoughts. I agree with Tim. I think that particularly at the high school, this is something that does need to happen. And I can appreciate what you're saying, that doing it over Christmas break would not be the best time to do that. But I do think this is something that we should get done at least at the high school as soon as practicable. I have concerns about the cost, and I'm concerned about committing this kind of money, even if we just do the high school, without knowing final numbers from the state, which I think we're going to get those fairly soon. It sounds like by the end of the month, hopefully, we're going to get something. So I also think that giving the public an opportunity to weigh in if they want to is fine. I'm not real wild about the idea of putting it in a survey, because surveys are kind of a yes or no sort of question, and I don't know that that's going to give us the information that we necessarily want. You know, if we want to, and I agree with Allison, I think the parental input is probably the stakeholder group that we need to hear from most on this. You know, maybe it's something that could be addressed at conferences and open houses, although those tend not to be real well attended at the high school. No, it's true.
Maybe they would be if there was a session on it.
Right. So I guess, unless people have other questions or things they want to say about this, that I would entertain a vote. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to the discussion right now? John?
Well, it sounds like people are most comfortable in any type of movement forward with only the high school. Is that a fair assessment?
It sounds like it, but I think, you know, Donna's got a point where, you know, we only talked about this the first time a week ago. And
I wasn't trying to convince anybody to vote to move forward.
Oh,
I just meant as it sits right here.
Yeah.
It sounds like we have a lot of discomfort with considering or with approving security cameras to be installed in all buildings. It sounds like people are most interested in considering at least the high school and possibly even receiving more feedback before we give a final approval to install security cameras in the high school. So I'm wondering if it would be, before voting, if it would be worthwhile to, or if a worthwhile amendment, or an amendment that could build consensus would be to vote to approve acquisition of a quote for the high school itself and not the other buildings.
Well, we get to the point, though, that Paul talked about, which is unless we're actually going to move ahead with installation over Christmas break, it probably doesn't make sense to do that just yet.
Right. So is there any way that we could amend this to consider only the high school, but potentially not, for us to move forward as a board in considering this and still offer ourselves an opportunity to revisit sometime in the near future after having received input from other stakeholders that just considers the high school without giving final approval if that's something that people are uncomfortable with right now? Or maybe I'm misreading.
No, you can. You can offer that amendment. We could then, if Donna is not willing to accept the amendment to her original motion, then we can vote on the amendment itself to the motion.
Can we not just table it for the time being?
That's also a possibility. Somebody can move to table the motion.
I mean, that doesn't kill it, it just says.
Correct.
We're not taking it up at this time.
Correct.
Is that?
Among your parliamentary options is to move to table the motion, which requires a second and a simple majority for that to happen.
Then I would move to table it.
Okay.
Second.
Second from Allison. Any discussion on the motion to table the original motion? All right. Let's do a hand vote because I think there might be a difference of opinion here. This is on the motion to table the original motion. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those not in favor of tabling. Okay. And the chair is not voting since it's not needed. So that is tabled. I'm going to summarize what I think I'm hearing, and if anybody disagrees, please let me know. I think we want to find out what our final budget numbers are before we take further action. I think we want to, in some way, shape, or form, offer an opportunity for community input, particularly from parents. And if anybody has suggestions on how we can do that, and again, my feeling is a survey isn't necessarily going to be useful. You know, a town hall would be ideal, but I don't know who else is going to show up for something like that.
What about,
But anyway, so budget, stakeholder input, and then there were concerns about policy coordination, but I think that could be done. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Scott, I would also ask that if this is something that, in order for timeline, in order to give Cal and Paul time to get the final bids and schedule somebody to install them over the summer, if we could make a decision by March.
Is that too late, Paul, or do you want more time than that?
Well, I mean, it really depends on budget. If we're using this year's budget.
Let's just say for the time being we are.
Preferably, I would say February would give us, I mean, the RFP process can drag out. I mean, we can expedite it a little bit, but to get vendors to walk through all the buildings, I mean, it's a pretty big project.
Okay.
So I'd be preferably the sooner the better if we're using this year's budget. If we're looking at next year's budget, then it can all, then it can't be done.
So then by February, if a decision could be made so that if we are going forward with installing cameras, it gives us time to do that.
Sure. Steve?
Would winter break be a good time for vendors to walk through the building?
Yes. Yep.
So maybe we could do it before winter break?
But you can just, you can walk them through
anytime
without approval from us.
Yeah. I mean, we can start the RFP process. If you guys approve it, so we can start the RFP process at any point. That doesn't give us authority to install the cameras.
Right.
Okay.
So if there's going to be more conversation about this, that way we can get kind of a feeling one way or another as to whether we're moving forward with the RFP, that would be helpful. But it's not to say that we can't walk them through after hours.
Okay.
So,
all right.
But yes, it would be an ideal time to give us
I just want to get back to the gathering feedback. I agree with Scott. I don't necessarily like the idea of a survey. I don't think, I think it's going to be yes or no. And I think but it does, I think, bring up a larger issue of how we are gathering feedback on issues like this. We're here to represent the people of the community as board members. We're voted in here. But we do also want to reach out to our constituents as we make decisions as well. I have very strong opinions about this as a parent of 2 kids in this district and their safety, and this being a valuable tool for our schools to use to ensure that safety. As a parent, I have that. So how are we, and maybe I'm just asking out loud or thinking out loud, how are we formally yet informally, quite frankly, gathering that feedback without saying on the survey? Because I also hear sometimes folks will say, well, I hear from a lot of people. Does that mean 2 people? Does that mean 3?
Right.
What does that mean? Yet I also don't like the idea of always sending out a survey every time we're trying to make a decision. So maybe it's a larger thing to talk about at a board development. And how are we really embracing this feedback in an ongoing way to get that feedback? So every time we have a decision to make, sometimes in a very timely manner, which I'm fine with us tabling this, but I want to make sure that we have processes in place that are sort of consistent in regards to gathering that feedback, outside of just who we talk to in terms of our networks, but also having some of those systems in place I think would be valuable. And this could be just a good opportunity for us to talk about that and try some of those out.
No, I think that's an excellent point. My thinking out loud is we'll come back to this in November, I think, and talk about it some more. In the meantime, if any of you have ideas on how we could try to gather input from the community, especially parents, let me know, and I can bring that back to the board as a whole for consideration. You know, maybe reaching out to working for parents groups is an idea that we might try.
So school newsletters?
Well, I mean, I have a few thoughts. I mean, you know, a couple thoughts, and again, these are just thinking off the top of my head. One thought I have is working with Isabel to get, I'd love to hear the students' thoughts on this and their perspective on this. They may bring a whole different perspective to this, and so have conversations with students. The board could also choose to, we could send something out, and let's say you're targeting high school. We could send something out to an email blast out to all high school parents and say that the board is having several listening sessions before a board meeting. And maybe you say 6:30 to 7 these 2 nights for anybody who has comments on the topic of cameras, and invite the public in just on that topic and give them a set timeline of, you know, here's the time you give input. There are all different things we can think of to do. Again, those are just off the top of my head. I haven't flushed any of them out. I haven't really, but there are some ways that we can gather feedback, and I agree that survey is probably not the best, but there is a way that we could do some face-to-face. I think somebody brought up conferences. We could always have a listening session related to conferences and let people know, and it might drive some people to come to conferences. So there are different things that we could do.
And I think it's not, I mean, it's just as much getting some input as it is an education component. I think we need to educate parents. I mean, maybe parents don't understand what the issues are and need to understand what they are, and what would their expectations be if there were security cameras. Like I said, are they going to be able to demand to see video when anytime their kid gets in trouble, or they think their child has been bullied, or, you know, any of these? I just think we need to kind of thoughtfully think about how we could do both, get their input, but also kind of expose them to some of the realities of what's going on in the school, and what are some, you know, what we are thinking about is how we would be approaching that. So, sorry to have like put a big wrinkle in this whole thing, but
No, it's good.
I had the same, yeah, it was good.
Okay. Well, as I said, I'll tentatively try to get this back in front of everybody in November, and in the meantime, please give me your thoughts on how to get input from the community. Okay, thank you. That was a good discussion. The other 2 action items we have are regarding 2 policies. Policy 707 on graduation. I would entertain a motion on that.
I move that we approve the modification to policy 707 graduation, in that we change from 22 total credits to 24 total credits due to state statute adding additional credit requirements in math and science, and that we also change credits into early graduation from 15 and 18.5 to 16.5 and 20 in proportion to those changes.
There's been a motion to approve the change to policy 707. Is there a second?
Second.
From Steve. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And then policy 1022, managing life-threatening allergies.
I move that we approve new policy 1022, managing life-threatening allergies, as presented in our packet, that was developed by the school nurse, and deals with students and allergies.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Yoli. Any discussion or questions? Isabel?
I just realized I had a question about the graduation
Oh,
one. So
okay.
adding 2 credits, would that be adding like a science and math credit you said?
Well, it's actually not any different than what you're, that's what our practice is right now. It's just having policy reflect that.
Okay.
So it's whatever your requirements are right now. Our policy was lagging.
Okay.
So starting with last year's graduating class of 2017, state law required that all students graduating from 217 and beyond have 3 credits of math and 3 credits of science to graduate.
Okay.
That was it, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so going back to policy 1022, are there any questions or discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, and that's approved then. A couple things before we go to adjourn. Next 2 regular board meetings are September 18th and October 2nd. Finance meets on September 18, facility meets September 19, and policy's next meeting is October 2nd. I believe you're all aware, excuse me, that over the weekend, Sarah Robb submitted her resignation from the board effective immediately because she is going to be the new senior pastor at Covenant Lutheran Church, and she's just not going to have time to be on the board. So, board policy, under board policy, we will be advertising that vacancy in the hub on the 14th and the 21st with directions to potential applicants as to where to send their application. And then on October 2nd, Tim is actually not going to be here, so we have had a fairly light agenda in the first place. At the October 2nd meeting, then we will interview candidates and we'll have the opportunity to vote on a successor for Sarah. So I just wanted to walk everybody through that. So if you want to see exactly how the procedure works, I mean, we've got 3 new board members who haven't been through this before. Go through policy, it's 111, I believe. And, pardon?
111.
Yeah. And hopefully, we will have a new board member who would then be seated, assuming that we do pick somebody. We don't have to. But assuming we do, that person would then be seated at the October 2nd meeting. Question?
They would be up for election in April.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes, because of the timing of the resignation, whomever that is would have to run for re-election in April, and that would be for the remainder of Sarah's term, so they'd only serve 1 year.
So what would happen is there would be 4 seats open in April.
Right.
The top 3 vote getters would get a 3-year term. The 4th vote getter gets a 1-year term.
Right.
Because Sarah's seat is up, not this April, but the April after.
Right.
Is that state law?
What?
Is that,
Our policy?
Yes.
Yeah, our policy is in compliance with state
Okay.
law.
just curious.
Yep.
It seems like somebody fills a space, if they're good enough to be chosen to fill that space, that they should get, but I get it.
Yeah, we had Nikki, who was here
Yeah.
for 6 months and did not get elected.
Sure,
So-
and that happens with other offices as well.
Yeah.
You know, if a judge dies or resigns in the middle of a 6-year term, depending on how close to their election that happens, they may have to stand for re-election some months later.
It depends, state law reads, it depends on when the resignation takes place.
Right.
If it takes place after the last Tuesday in November, then whoever's appointed does not run for re-election that April, they have another April to do.
Right.
But anything before that November date has to come up for election in the April election.
Right.
So that's something that the board could, that's resignation occurs, not.
Correct.
Right,
Right,
resignation.
the resignation occurred Saturday or
So
something.
it's in our best interest, I would think, to get somebody seated as quickly as possible.
Right.
Because they would have to make the determination whether they want to run
Right.
in December.
Right. Notice of non-candidacy has to be filed on December 22nd or 23rd. So that person, basically gets 6-8 weeks on the job before they have to decide whether or not they want to run for re-election. We have, and on the same subject, there are, like I said, we've gone through this process many times. It seems like almost every year we end up doing this. So we have a number of interview questions that we have used in years past. They've been tweaked a little bit. There's nothing particularly special about them, I wouldn't say. It's just to get allows us to get an idea of what the candidate is like. I will circulate drafts of those questions for people to look at. If you have suggestions for modifications or different questions, you can respond to me, but make sure you're only responding to me, not reply all, otherwise we've got an open meetings violation. Okay?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So when I was going through the policy, it said that procedure for voting by the remaining board member will be conducted by the clerk as described in Exhibit 111-16A, but there's nothing here.
No, there's not. I noticed the same thing.
There should be.
It's very confusing.
Oh, I'm sure that just happened when they converted everything over.
Oh.
I'm sure
yeah,
the
that didn't occur
exhibit
to me.
exists.
Tim, maybe we could get that dug up and circulated to the board. I didn't look at it recently, but I believe I've seen that on our website.
And the other question I have, it says that the clerk has to send advertisement.
Right,
so
and we've got a model.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We've done this enough that
And it will be on the website as well?
it will be on the website as well.
Right. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Joe moved, second from Yoli. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Hey, Isabel, you're going to be our source for North Star?
That's what I was thinking.